Welcome. This lesson is called Employee Dishonesty Leaves Clues, and in it I'm going to describe some of the most common methods used to embezzle from a dental practice and the most common red flags that should be and sometimes are not observed. Okay, so what are the most common schemes used to steal? Well, theft of cash is very common. Cash is tempting. Anyone who has a dishonest streak will invariably, at some point in time, regardless of the method that they are using to steal, they will steal some cash. If the practice gets over-the-counter cash, and most practices do, I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the other lessons. But cash is tempting. It's very easy to conceal. You can put it in your pocket. You can take it. You don't need to convert it. It's not like a check that you've got to cash or a credit card that you've got to do a refund or, in a healthcare claim, insurance claim you've got to falsify and send in for reimbursement. It's cash, and you can just take it and spend it. And cash is also inducible, and I'll talk about that in a moment. There's a very interesting with cash that your employees, a dishonest employee, can convince or induce patients to bring cash in. Check tampering. Now, we saw that with Dr. Rob File and Erica Cameron. She stole over $600,000. I've had cases involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, over $500,000 in stealing in company checks and insurance company checks. So check tampering is very common. Payroll schemes. If you give an employee the authority to process payroll and they are the ones who enter the hours and cut the checks and put the employees in, you may see when someone is dishonest, they will have ghost employees or they'll have unauthorized overpayments or payroll padding to themselves, family members, or other staff members. Phony refunds. Starting to see more and more of this over the last 5 to 6 years. And these are for practices that issue refunds back by check or by credit card. Often some of the more high, I'll call them higher end practices where they're doing full mouth reconstruction, take a $10,000 or $20,000 down payment and then do the work. Sometimes patients have thousands of dollars in refunds. In other cases, it may be an overpayment from an insurance company. If your office should process few or little refunds, and if you do, you should go about it the right way. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Healthcare fraud. This is a big one. This is when somebody steals insurance checks for work that you didn't do. So they decide that Delta Dental's pockets are bigger than yours, and they start submitting claims for patients where the work wasn't done. The checks come into your practice, and then they convert those checks for their own benefit. Now, that has a lot of different implications because now there's a third-party victim. But this is one of the most common schemes that I see as well, and it's when employees use the doctor's credentials to defraud insurance companies. And the last one is expense padding. Now, this could be, buying things on their Amazon account, on your Amazon account, and having it sent home. Come September, when it's back to school, they take the Business Depot card and they go and they charge up a whole lot of things, office supplies. Now, it may seem that this is a small amount of money, but expense padding can add up, and it is the etiology of many larger frauds. If someone is willing to steal $100 or $200 or $500 from you through expense padding, then they've crossed that dishonest threshold, and they'd be willing to do any one of these other schemes given the opportunity. So in the lesson, there's a post called Safekeeping Insurance Checks. This is for Fraudbuster members only. There's a lot of tips here about how to keep your insurance payment checks that are coming in the mail safe and protected. Now, if you remember, I said that cash was inducible. So what you're about to hear now is a voice message left on a patient's telephone answering machine. The receptionist or office manager had called in to confirm the patient's appointment. Just listen to the directions that the employee gives to the patient.
Office regarding your appointment today. I wanted to call you. We do not accept checks, and we usually accept, cash and credit cards, but my credit card machine is down today, so I wanted to call and let you know to make sure that you bring cash for your appointment today because we don't accept checks. If you have any questions, you can call me back.
We don't accept checks, but we do accept cash. And cash, she said 4 times. Checks, she said 3 times in that message, I believe. But, one of the standard questions I ask a lot of practice owners when they call me with concerns is, how far away is the nearest ATM? And I've had instances similar to this. This is someone being proactive and contacting patients in advance to say, bring in cash. The other method is that someone will, when the patient arrives, they'll say, "Oh, our credit card terminal is down. I can't accept your card right now." "Oh, but there's an ATM out in the hallway." Now, if you're in a building where you've got Citibank downstairs or an ATM downstairs or across the street and there's easy access, a lot of patients will say, "Okay, sure, I'll go get cash." And they'll go to the machine, they'll get some cash, and they'll come back and they'll pay. And even if your office employee, if the dishonest employee says, "And don't worry, we'll cover your fee, your $1.75 fee or your 75-cent fee or whatever it is the bank machine might charge for you to withdraw that cash." So cash is inducible. And any employee who is targeting primarily cash will do everything and anything within their power to recognize those patients that pay in cash and be sure that they are there to intercept those payments when they come in and induce those patients to bring in cash. Let's look at another common method I had mentioned, which was refunds.
Aaron Bokemper worked as a customer service rep here at Oral Maxillofacial Associates on the city's far northwest side. According to police and court records, a patient who had paid $1,000 up front decided to back out and wanted their money back. Police say Bokemper completed the refund, but instead of sending the money to the patient, the $1,000 was diverted into her own negative balance checking account.
A patient had contacted them and said that they were supposed to be refunded a certain amount of money, and for whatever reason the money didn't make it to the patient. They discovered that the employee had actually set it up to where that money was sent to her personal account rather than to the patient.
The Midwest City woman was charged in March with felony embezzlement and computer crimes. Fast forward to June. The surgery center did an audit. It found Bokemper had allegedly been doing the same patient dollar diversion to her own accounts for nearly a year, taking 34 patients for more than 24 grand.
The same employee had done this multiple times, and that it was possible that up to $24,000 worth of money had been embezzled by this employee.
According to search warrants filed this week in Oklahoma County and police records, Bokemper would find patient accounts that had a credit, and rather than giving the money to the patient, she credited that amount onto 2 credit cards. A surgery center employee telling News 4 it's not commenting. Calls to Bokemper's attorney went unreturned.
Okay, I'm going to make a couple of comments about this. First of all, Bokemper was looking through the billing system for credits. And if she found a credit, then she would go and request a credit refund check, go through the process, get that check or whatever. She'd take the money and refund it to her own credit card. I'm sorry, she refund to her own credit card. If you're a little bit more creative and a little bit more risky and more dishonest, then what you'll do is you will create credits, create fictitious credits. So instead of looking for credits that are bona fide and patients are owed a refund, you go in and you make one up. And unless there's some oversight by the practice owner to uncover these things, they'll just fly through the system. So refunds to checks and credit cards are very common, but they're easy to stop. And I'm going to show you an article now in a moment for members only where you can do that. But I do want to comment about the media and the way that the media portrays things. This was a news article, and perhaps you didn't notice. They're talking about an oral surgery center. And then when they started to talk about cash, theft of cash and refunds, this is the stock footage that they use. Now, this, if you pay attention, this is from the tax office. But just watch.
Police say Bokemper completed the refund, but instead of sending the money to the patient, the $1,000 was...
That was an image from the state treasury counting $100 bills. Now, maybe that's not a good perception to have for people who want to work in an oral surgery practice, or for the public to have about an oral surgery practice, that they had to have machines that count $100 bills, 10 per second. I just felt it was a little bit biased here by the media. Let's look at patient refunds. Patient refunds, are you doing it right? So there's a link in the lesson where you can go and you can read about this. It's for members only, but if you're taking this course, you are a Fraudbuster member, and you can go in and it'll tell you about how to do patient refunds right, how to make sure that you don't lose money to patients for fictitious refunds. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about honesty for a moment and whether or not there's an honesty test. Now, Kurt Lewin, if you go back to your Psych 100, Kurt Lewin was a psychologist who came up with a formula that had an explanation of what determines behavior, Lewin's equation. And he says the behavior of a person is the function of the person and their environment. Well, it's very much like Darwin, where Darwin said the behavior of an organism adapts to its environment and change. An organism will change its behavior as a function of its environment. Well, it's the same thing here psychologically in the world of human psychology. Kurt Lewin came up with this, and it is a bit of an honesty test, right? Because people's behavior will change if their environment changes. So you may have unimpeachable integrity and you'd say, I will never steal. But if a loved member's life or your life were threatened and that was your only option was to steal to save that life, you might do it. It's a function of the environment. The good thing is most of us have a very high threshold. We have to have threat of death or dismemberment or something drastic happening to a loved one or a family member before we would cross those ethical lines. For other people, they do it as soon as their eyes are open in the morning. So this Lewin's equation can be applied very nicely to people who steal. And what I'm going to talk about now are the red flags of fraud. And these are behavioral red flags that people exhibit when they are changing their own environment to steal from a practice. In order for me to steal from you as a practice owner, I've got to change the environment. I've got to conceal things from you. And in order to do that, my behavior is going to change. So a red flag, it's important. A red flag is an indicator that fraud may be present, but it doesn't guarantee its presence. It could be something innocent, but may point towards something more sinister. Now, what you cannot do is ignore a red flag. You always have to find the etiology of the red flag. Now, I'll give you an example of where this was totally benign. A practice owner called me one day and said, look, red flag, my office manager, or was the employee who was handling the money, is coming in every day. She's coming in at 6:30 a.m. I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, I've got the alarm system and it tells me who the first person is in every day. And for the last month and a half, the last 6 or 8 weeks, she's been coming in at 6:30. And my practice doesn't open until 8. And most people don't come in until 7:30. That's when we begin our day. He said, I have no explanation. Do you think she's stealing? I said, well, we went through some conversation. I gave him a few things to ask staff, what he needed to do to try and find out. Well, it turns out this. She was having vehicle problems or didn't have a vehicle, and rather than take the bus, she decided to carpool. It was a fair distance to where the work was. It was like 10 or 20 miles to work, and she decided to carpool with somebody. The unfortunate thing was that this person worked an hour earlier in the morning than she did, and therefore the consequence to the employee was, well, in order for me to get a ride, I'm going to come in extra early. And so it was a benign thing. There were no entries in the computer system. The audit logs were good. There was nothing going on. So again, it can be innocent, but it could be also, again, more sinister. But you cannot ignore red flags. If you do ignore them, then that opens the door for your practice to be embezzled. So what are the top 6 red flags? Now, in 85% of embezzlement cases, there's at least one red flag, and I think in 57 or 50% of embezzlement cases, there's 2 red flags. And there's an article that I posted in the lesson called Understanding Embezzlement Red Flags, and also there's a test that you can do to assess your own practice for red flags. But these are the top 6 red flags. Lifestyle. Lifestyle is number 1. When you notice that somebody is living beyond one's means. Now, if you take someone who's making $20 an hour and they decide to steal $20 an hour, they've doubled their salary. And in doing so, that means double the lifestyle. So they live beyond one's means. It may be bling. It may be they have merchandise. They have wanderlust. They have pretentiousness. My wife's a dental hygienist, or was, and she's retired from that now. And in the first practice where she worked, she overheard the office manager talking about the great restaurants she was eating at. These were like 4- and 5-star restaurants in our city. And she said, that seems very odd for this person who has that type of lifestyle to be able to be affording these $300 a pop meals. Well, it turned out that Sonia was stealing. This was my first embezzlement case. It was Sonia Green, and she had taken Mike for over $60,000. Again, it was living beyond one's means was the red flag that tipped off Mike in knowing that his employee Sonia had been stealing. She was subsequently convicted. She did go on to another dental practice, I believe, and steal from there. Money problems. It could be financial stresses at home. Now, financial stress is idiosyncratic. What's a problem for me may not be a problem for you. Not making a mortgage payment or having your gas cut off is a problem for everybody. But not being able to buy that new pair of red shoes or pay your cable bill or your fancy cell phone bill, that might be a problem for somebody else. So money problems are idiosyncratic. They're personal and familial. Interestingly enough, statistics will show that 39% of people who steal for money problems are female, 24% are male. I make no judgment here as to gender bias, but those are the statistics. Irritability and suspiciousness. And this is someone who delays in providing information to you. And they always offer alternate scenarios when asked questions and able to deflect blame. So if you ask your employee for something, it's, what? Yep, I'll get it later. You may ask for something in the morning. You don't get it till the next day. Irritability and suspiciousness is a top red flag. Control issues. This is someone who's unwilling to share duties and sets aside work pre-absentia. Hey, I've got an appointment at my doctor this afternoon. My work is over there in the corner. Don't let anyone touch it until I get back. So they'll give orders about who does what when and how while they're away from the practice, and they're very unwilling to share duties. Divorce. Well, there's the 3 Ds, divorce, drugs, and debt. But divorce or other family problems, it could be a son who has trouble in trouble with the law or supporting 2 relationships. And the other top 6 red flag is a wheeler-dealer attitude. And this is someone who has a sense of cutting corners. They have a false sense of entitlement. And they ingratiate themselves with people for their own gain. And you know how to read these people. So if you see these types of red flags, don't ignore them. And there is a way to go through and assess those red flags to find out what the etiology is without going full on and having a forensic audit done just based merely on a suspicion. But again, you do need to follow the red flags. And included in this lesson is my flow chart here. I'm not going to explain it, but if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. You want to stay in the green. That's where you keep checking the red flags and looking for plausible explanations. If you go into the yellow, then you've got to work it through. Red is when you've confirmed fraud. So you follow this flow chart when you're following red flags in your. On behalf of Hiltz & Associates and Dental Fraud Busters, thank you for taking this course. Don't forget to complete the quiz. It's a certificate that you can earn upon completion of all of the lessons and completion of the quiz. If you have any questions about this course, if you have any questions about its content, if you have any suggestions for how it can be improved, please contact me. Let me know. I'm here to help. My virtual door is always open. Thank you again, and have a great day.